setting a screen. Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen. Izzo's dying for a moving screen.
It's that dreaded moving screen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn from The Athletic, here with the great Dylan Burkhart of Hoops. That's right. It's been a while, and I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you, Dylan.
That's sweet. Good to be back and recording the podcast.
Yes.
Late July. College hoops is kind of getting back to a normal schedule. Things are good.
Being overshadowed a little bit, I would say, by the absolute chaos on the football side of things and college sports in general being kind of shape-shifted in real time into something that will be completely unrecognizable in pretty short order, right?
It seems that way. I have a hard time keeping up with the latest conference moving.
So Alabama and Oklahoma are going to the SEC. You know that.
Texas and Oklahoma.
What did I say?
Alabama. Alabama's already in the SEC. I know that much.
Texas and Oklahoma are going to the SEC. And they just, I think they're going through all of the legal loopholes right now of patting the Big 12 on the head on the way out and then making sure they can jockey themselves for the next SEC or to get out of the current Big 12 deal, because there's no freaking way that they're playing 4 more years in that league. And then they're going to finagle their way into the SEC, and then that TV deal will get reworked and they'll make all of the money.
All I want to see out of this is a NCAA title from the Big Ten in the hoops.
Kansas?
So make it happen. Kansas to the Big Ten. That might get the job done. Someone's got to come in and get the job done.
Here's a question before we're talking about the draft today. This isn't really a realignment pod, but I have a question for you. So if you're Kansas, right, and you can go to the ACC, you can go to the Big Ten, wouldn't you see the ACC as more like-minded and I would see North Carolina, Duke as kind of my proxies, as opposed to I'm going to go play Michigan and Ohio State and Michigan State.
So here's the thing about being an athletic director. I think the first thing you see is the number of commas in a check.
Yeah,
and I think that's probably where you point your radar first, is whoever writes the biggest check. And then I think you probably go from there and deal with it.
But it's not like the ACC's poor. ACC's got some money. Big Ten has more, but the ACC's got a lot of money.
Big Ten's got more money, a better geographical fit for sure. I don't really know how Kansas feels about any of its other sports. I know, as far as perception and what they want to prioritize, I know they're terrible at football, but I don't know, is that just an accepted truth, or do they want to be in a better football league? Because I don't know. It'll be interesting.
I mean, Kansas is the only one of 2 schools in the country that would, or one of 3, we'll say, that would make truly I could see making truly basketball first decisions. We're going to do what's best for basketball. Right?
So maybe you go to the ACC. I don't. If you're the Big Ten, which is a football first league, do you want Kansas either? It's a lot to unpack, and what goes into these decisions isn't always the on court or on field product. Obviously, it's all about the money. So I think that's what you got to follow.
It's TV numbers, it's market value. Absolutely.
So you're saying Big Ten tournament at the Sprint Center? Here we go.
I had a great time in Kansas City the last time we were there. I don't even remember what it was for. Oregon, was that right? Michigan, Oregon, was that in Kansas City?
That was in Kansas City.
Man, that was a trip.
That was a trip. And now we're going to talk about the NBA draft today.
Yeah. Well, it's draft week. Draft is what, Thursday night?
Yes, Thursday night. I feel like the NBA draft has been a moving target over the last few years, more than just about anything, where it's just all the schedule changes are throwing it left and right. It is big event. We got a lot of Michigan State people to sort through and talk about maybe how it all plays out.
Yeah, we'll kind of just give our general thoughts on these guys, their college careers, how they project. Neither Dylan nor I pretend to be NBA draft experts on where these guys are going to be selected or any of that shit. But I think we can kind of talk about value, like who maybe has a little bit more value than NBA teams see and things like that. Because, we did watch every game that all these guys played. So make sure you subscribe to The Athletic. Make sure you subscribe to Hoops. Do all that stuff. Leave us a review, blah, blah, blah. So, all right, let's get into it. Franz Wagner. His draft descent has been fascinating because it was like he was, when he got to Michigan, right, this is a future NBA guy who could have stayed overseas and probably gone to the NBA that way, play for Alba Berlin, right, be one of those overseas guys that pop up as a first-round pick. He comes to Michigan. Biggest change has been his body by far in terms of his pro future and what these teams needed to see. How loud is that leaf blower?
It's a nice ambiance to the pod. It's good.
Yeah, well, we'll deal with it. We'll send it to the editing crew and maybe they can drown that out.
You're looking right at the editing crew, so good luck with that.
So when Franz, his over the last 2 years, he probably could have left after his freshman year and been drafted. Probably would have been a borderline first-round pick. This year, outside of his three-point shooting, he certainly established himself as a first-round pick without a doubt. But then through the months and weeks since the year has gone from a guy that people were talking about, in that late lottery to 20 area to suddenly people are talking about him at number 10, and so he's just, I think as people have seen him more and more, probably seen him a lot on the, watched his defensive tape, that his value has increased by the day.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting because he has had probably one of the more quiet draft process, right? He didn't attend the combine. He's only had a few workouts. He's sort of kept things largely under wraps, which is what you kind of expect to see from someone who's pretty confident they're going to go in a very comfortable spot. So I think there's clearly some feedback there in teams that like him. I've heard about him talked about as high as Sacramento, who's picking in the top 10, right? So I think it's easy to see the potential and the upside. I think his age plays a huge factor in kind of his evaluation. You're looking at him, he's the age of several guys who are coming out as one and dones. And that's a big advantage when you can say, all right, this guy's already played basically 3 years of valuable film on good competition, whether it was overseas, whether it was at Michigan. You have a lot to go off of and time to grow into more. It's so funny to kind of view him based on how the season ended and also how much he really expanded his game as a sophomore. It's not just that he got bigger and stronger. He was probably one of the very best defensive players in the Big Ten. He did play way more with the ball in his hands. He played more out of ball screens. He shot the ball better despite how the season ended. I mean, if you take that game out, he probably shot 4 or 5% better from three this year than he did as a freshman. So there's a lot to like. I do think his role in the NBA all comes down to his ability to defend, his combination of length and just really basketball IQ just kind of sets him apart on that end. And I think it's easy to say, okay, well, this guy will at least be able to fit in defensively. But I do think you look at it and he's going to have to be able to, if he's going to be an NBA starter, it's going to be a guy who shoots 40% from three. I think he just has to do that because I don't really know how useful he can be as a player that doesn't make threes consistently based on the rest of his game. I think there's a better chance he makes threes consistently than is a kind of a go-to creator or anything like that. Right. So I think that's kind of the swing skill and it's been the swing skill. So that's kind of where I'm at with him. It seems like he has a good chance to go in the top 10 though, which is impressive and a testament to how much he improved, I think, this year.
Yeah. It was interesting that I didn't go to the combine because I think people did want to kind of see his measurements and stuff like that. But I had to write little draft thing. So I hit Sanderson last week to try to see what the last times that Franz did his measurements. He said he measured in last week and he was just under 6'10". He's at 225 pounds and his wingspan's now just over 7 feet. So it's NBA teams, obviously, that brought him in, they know all that. But it's not only 225, it's it's a 25. Like he's got arms now and stuff. He looks totally different than the 17-year-old that these teams were looking at 2 years ago, and certainly the guy that arrived at Michigan. But here's a question for you. So the question about his shooting, right? Like he looks the part. Like his shooting form looks fairly good, but then at the same time, I feel like anytime it went up, it did not look like it was going in. And say what you will about the last couple games skewing the numbers, and you can say the beginning of his freshman year, coming off the broken hand, probably skewed his numbers for the first half of that year. But fact is, he shot 32% over 2 years at Michigan. So, like, how far off do you think, like, it is the reality of what he is as a shooter versus the perception of what he should be or could be as a shooter?
I think he has more potential maybe than people give him. I think you look at his free throw shooting over 80% both years. That's obviously thought of as a pretty strong indicator for kind of shooting potential and upside over time. I watched a really good video that Mike Schmitz did. Like, he interviewed Franz and kind of went through film, and it was fascinating to watch. All of his videos are really interesting to kind of see how guys process the game. But he was talking about his shot and really described it as a mental thing. You can see when he just shoots it quickly and like doesn't hesitate, or he kind of hesitates and leans back, he always misses. And when he just goes into his shot immediately, it's much more consistent. And I thought that was interesting to hear Franz talk about. And I really do think that's part of it is there was a kind of that split second of, should I shoot? And I don't think he's not wired like just get up shots, right? If you watch guys who are true shooters, they're catching the ball to shoot every time. It doesn't matter if they're shooting well. It doesn't matter if they're shooting poorly. He kind of catches the ball and thinks about, is there anything I can do other than shoot? And then will shoot if he's wide open. And if you go back and watch a lot of his shots, he does hesitate, even on a lot of the shots he makes. And I think that's key. I also think just role is key. Like, he's in an interesting spot where a lot of what Michigan needed from him was his ability to get downhill and slash to the basket.
Right.
And he did that well. And then it was just kind of that mind game late in the season of people just straight up going under ball screens and forcing him to shoot. And that, I think that more than anything is a mental challenge for guys who aren't in love with their jump shot, right? Like, it's just a pure, like, it's a test of your mental stability, basically, to keep shooting those shots when you know you would rather do anything else. You want to get to your right hand and get downhill and score, but the right play is to shoot. And I think that was maybe the hardest thing to deal with for him, at least late in the year. And I wonder how that projects moving forward. But I think that's what it comes down to for me. Like, I think his shot mechanics aren't terrible, really. Like, it's not like it's broken.
Yeah, it's a really good point that about teams starting to go under screens, because anyone that's already kind of not struggling with, but it has to go through the mental process of, should I shoot or should I not? Like, going under screens is kind of that ultimate, like, creation of hesitancy, right? Of like, oh shit, and to your point, I think speaks to also a larger point that a lot of NBA folks have talked about when it comes to Franz. And it's this idea of there is a degree of passiveness or passivity. I don't know. We'll go with one of those two to his offensive game and him as a scorer specifically. I think a lot of that's being 19.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have to hardwire him. And it's one of those very interesting differences between he and his brother, right? Like, whatever team selects Mo or selects Franz, their fans that follow basketball are going to immediately think of Mo Wagner and picture Mo Wagner, when Franz couldn't be any more different than Mo.
Even beyond the mentality, one plays defense, one does not.
One's an outdated small 5 stretch 4, which isn't even a thing anymore, and the other is a like ultra modern NBA type. I mean, they're just
6'10" wing.
Different. Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious what you think. What would be the best fit for Franz? Like, not necessarily a specific team, but do you think he's best to go into a contender? Do you think he's like grow into a team? I'm curious how you think what would be best for his fit fit moving forward, do you think?
I just feel like an older team of mature guys because he is an extremely smart dude. I think he is going to be extremely businesslike kind of in his approach to improving and getting better and playing and caring about winning and things like that. And if you put him on one of these kind of island of misfit toy type teams in the league and are expecting to like build around him as a young piece, that's not it. I think you need him in a place with older guys as a complementary piece who can develop in time, have another year plus to continue working on his body, and be in a role of where the fan base is not looking at him as a, what the fuck? We took this guy 10th overall. He's supposed to be, a star. Like, I don't know if that's the ideal landing spot.
Yeah, I don't really think he projects to be that sort of player. You're basically taking him as filling a role more than like filling that star role. Like I don't think he's going to ever be an NBA All-Star, but I think he could be a really good starter on a really good team if you can find that around him. So that's kind of, I think we're pretty aligned there on terms of his fit. I'll be just really curious to see how he does fit in at that next level, because I think his role will be different. And he's played in a lot of different roles, right? Like if you look at what he did as a sophomore, a freshman, and what he did at Elba, it's diverse enough that I think he can fit into maybe different systems more than maybe you think about, just based on what he did this year at Michigan. So that'll be interesting. And I don't know. He's a very unique draft prospect. I feel like there could be a lot of different outcomes with how he kind of fits in at the next level.
Yeah. And it'll be pretty incredible to see just how high he goes. Cause like I said, I don't remember anyone talking about him possibly in the top 10, when he actually declared. So, things can change pretty quickly. It's kind of a, not exactly like Jordan Poole, but not totally different, so
I think I would say I think like throughout the season, I think he was viewed as a lottery pick. You disagree with that?
I thought I would say borderline lottery pick was kind of.
Yeah, I would say
certainly a first round pick, kind of peaking at borderline lottery. Now he's being talked about at number 10.
Yeah, I would say he was probably projected as top 20 pick throughout the season. I think that was pretty. I don't know. Maybe that's off, but that's kind of how I thought of him throughout the year. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he's risen from that spot, but it's definitely. I don't know if it's as dramatic as maybe Jordan Poole, who was thought about maybe as like undrafted and then became a first round pick. So is what it is. We want to move on to Aaron Henry. Who are we going next?
Well, let's go. We're using Sam Vecini's big board here. So in terms of who we're talking about, the next guy up will be Isaiah, right? He's at 52 on Sam's list. The kind of unbending question here is, where he would have been if the year didn't end the way it did, because the form that he was in at the time of when he rolled his ankle against Indiana. Was it Indiana?
You're testing my memory here. It was Illinois, I believe. Illinois is when he got hurt.
But he was really playing basically as well as he had in his basically entire college career, which it was just kind of brutal. It was brutal timing for a guy who already went through it as a junior, tested the draft, came back, put in the work. You remember us talking this time last year about all the work that he put in during the pandemic, working in, basically working in a private gym. And he was getting the payoff at the time. And then kind of poof, it went away. So I don't know. Where are you on Isaiah?
I've read some sort of scouting reports and whatever else that mention him as anything other than an elite shooter. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that's the one thing you're getting with him is he's an elite 3-point shooter who can space the floor. I think the big worry is just his measurements weren't particularly great at the combine. He's a big 3. He's not a small 4 by any stretch of the imagination, right? Like I think he measured like 6'7". That's not great, especially with his body type. Like I think to really project him as the player that you'd want him to be, he'd be more like a 6'8", 6'9" guy who you could stretch the floor with a little bit. But now I don't really know who he guards.
Right.
In college, it was always Isaiah Livers kills mismatches at the 4 when he's guarded by a bigger guy. I don't know if that really works as a 6'7" guy in the NBA. So basically for me, it comes down to obviously his health, which is hard. It's not going to help him, right, with back-to-back years ending like this. And then it's going to come down to, can he be a elite 40% NBA 3-point shooter? I think there's a chance that he actually could. So I like that. But I think his upside is limited a bit by just his kind of size and athleticism. And he's just an okay defensive player who's not really going to be an impact player on that side of the ball, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, like let's put it this way. And it's not, I don't think it's probably as lazy of a projection as it might come off as, but like the best case scenario would be Duncan Robinson. The irony, of course, being Isaiah replaced him in the lineup as a freshman, blah, blah, blah. But, Duncan is listed at 6'7" on the Miami Heat's official roster. He was listed at 6'8" or 6'9" at Michigan. I think he's probably a touch taller than Isaiah, but he's not dramatically bigger than him. He's a little slimmer, but he's just as athletic. Like his horizontal speed is very is probably
Isaiah's
similar.
A better athlete.
Isaiah's a better athlete. He can go down and throw it, right? But if that shooting can translate the way it has for Duncan, like that's Isaiah's ticket to money and a career and stability in the league if he can get there, beyond his health, of course.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think those two are that far off in terms of your possible, like I said, best case scenario.
Yeah, so Duncan Robinson wasn't a great movement shooter in college. Like he really grew into that ability to kind of shoot on the move. And that was a product of just how Michigan played in college, I guess. Isaiah Livers is kind of similar where he's best as a spot up guy more than like run off screens and shoot.
Right.
And
right.
I don't know how well, like obviously kind of, he can't be working out for teams or anything. Like, I don't really know what he projects to as a shooter like that. And that's just because that's not really what Michigan ran. Like you think of Purdue running that kind of stuff all the time, but Michigan's offense is very different than that. So I wonder how he would test out in those kind of drills and everything else, but he's a really good shooter. I think, honestly, there were times I think this year he could have looked for his 3-point shot more aggressively. Right.
Right.
So that's the ticket. I just think you'd like him a little bit more if like you're going to compare Isaiah Livers at 22 to Isaiah Todd's a spot below him in this big board.
Yeah.
He's younger, bigger wingspan, whatever else, like more athletic. One would have been a much better college player and was a better college player this year. But does Isaiah Todd look like when he's 22? Like that's what you have to kind of gauge at this point in the draft. And that's going to be, I think, the struggle for teams thinking about picking Isaiah when he hasn't even been able to work out.
All right. And one of the other things that I do like about Livers as a shooter in the league is like, I mean, he has range. Like he made shots a couple feet off the line and is really comfortable, I think, shooting out there. It's not one of those guys who a couple feet back, suddenly his shot looks a little different, I thought he can let it fly from anywhere. But your point about him running off screens, yeah, because the mold of just the shooter type is, you're the ideal is JJ Redick, right? Someone who can run off screens for 2 straight hours and still give you the same looks at the end of the game as he did in the beginning of the game. Isaiah, his body type, if you're running him off screens on 6 straight possessions, I don't know if you're getting the same shot on the 7th. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that's not his game.
And he's always kind of had that body type. I remember him, Beeline described him as 6'6" and pudgy when he saw him the first time, and he's put in work on his body. But, if
his NBA measurements or his combine measurements were still a bit 6'6" and pudgy, if you're going to put it in a
what was his
scale.
body fat at?
I think all the body fats seemed very messed up. They were like not human. They were all very low, but I don't think it was great.
I got it.
So that's the thing with him. And
9.4%, which is not great. He's 2% lower than Luka.
Yeah, that on the Luka.
Not great.
Yeah, so that's the question, right? And that's been his.
So, like, by comparison, just for the sake of it, for anyone listening, Aaron Henry 5.6%, Scotty Barnes 5.3, so on and so forth. Joe Wieskamp 4.1, Slim Jim.
Yeah. So that's where we're at with Isaiah. You
think he gets drafted?
I think because of kind of all the intangibles, I think he'll probably be one of the better interviews in that range. I think you kind of know what you're getting. I definitely could see him getting picked kind of in the late second round. I think he's too proven as a shooter to not have someone take a chance on him in that spot, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Maybe in that 50 to 60 range. And, worst case scenario, he is signed within 2 hours of the draft ending. But
do you know anything about his recovery? Is he going to be able to play?
I actually reached out to him and Bartelstein and didn't hear back from either. But I mean, the last time he spoke was at the combine, and he said he was, quote, ahead of schedule. He was getting out of his walking boot at that time. But look, I mean, at the end of the day, from his surgery, the projected recovery time was at least 6 months. So, he didn't work out for anybody. He didn't work out at the combine. He hasn't done anything. Luckily he's got like 125 games of game film from college to look at. But I mean, it's a total guess. And if he goes undrafted, it's probably because of the instability of his leg, because it's not only his ankle injury this year. He had the groin issue the year before that. He had prior ankle issues.
His foot, not his ankle, right?
This one, the current one? Yeah. But this is the foot, right? He previously had the groin. He previously had ankle issues. There's kind of a lot going on there. And what did I assume team doctors got their hands on him. That's probably what it's going to boil down to in terms of whether he gets selected or not. We can sit here and talk about him as a 3-point shooter, but if a team doctor says no, then he's not getting drafted, right? So total guesswork.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, he's a guy, I don't like the summer league's 3 weeks away. I can't imagine he's able to play in that. And that's going to be tough if he's in that fringe spot. What can you do that's really a chance to make your mark. You know what I mean? And not having that will make it probably that much more difficult, especially if he's in that undrafted late second round range.
Whether a team drafts him late or signs him immediately as an undrafted free agent, it's going to be with the idea of we're just going to store this guy for a year and let him, no one's going to be projecting him for next year regardless. Right. Yeah. So I don't know how much of a difference that'll make. I think it would be more, long-term investment, like a team that has bodies, right? Who has the luxury of saying, we just want to have him in our system. We're going to send him to the G League for a year for rehab and then hope for 2023 that he's a thing.
Fair.
All right. All right. Let's move on to Aaron Henry. Oh, and first of all, interlude. If anyone listening to this still cares this much, I highly, highly recommend finding Stan Bassini's draft guide on The Athletic.
Company man here. That's good. That's good.
No, I mean, have you looked at the big thing? Have you looked at the whole draft guide?
Yeah, I got it pulled up here.
Like not his big, the one that you have to enter the password for?
Yeah.
PDF. Yeah, it's fucking incredible. So if you care, definitely check it out. Not only for these guys, but anybody and dudes who your favorite NBA team might be drafted. It's unbelievable work from Sam. It's like 50,000 words or something. I don't know. But anyway, all right. Aaron Henry. This is kind of long time coming, it seems like, for him to. He had his blowout at the end of his freshman year, and some people at that time said he should go. And you know what? In hindsight, might not have been wrong. At the end of his, going into his sophomore year, he was supposed to be a star, and we all kind of know what happened there. He was still at the end of the day behind Cash Winston, Xavier Tillman, and probably didn't have quite as good of a sophomore year as everyone would have hoped. He declared for the draft. He decided to come back. Borderline, I think if there wasn't a pandemic, he would have been gone. And then this year, which, part of what he did, part of what his team was, and the limitations, he was never really playing the true role that he would have, could have, should have in a better situation. Michigan State had massive limitations that kind of, I thought, stretched him probably thinner than you would have wanted. But now he's basically a borderline back of the second half or back of the second round pick. We'll see if he goes. I think there's enough upside there that he's probably draftable. But we'll see. What do you got?
So he was so good at parts of the last kind of 2 months of the year. And he showed parts of his game that he hadn't shown. I think it's easy to forget now, but I mean, he had some incredible games down the stretch. And it was basically all Michigan State could do at times was just clear out Aaron Henry and let him go to work. And up to that point, like his first 2 years, he rarely was ever kind of in those playmaking situations. I think his obvious NBA skill is he can be an elite defensive player. I think he can guard multiple spots. I think he has the mentality, the tools, all that. I think so. That's what you have. What I can't really figure out with him is what his role is offensively on an NBA team. It's not like he proved that he can do that kind of playmaking ISO role for Michigan State. I don't think that's what he gets drafted as. I think a lot of guys in that mold, like his top Ken Palm comparison is Des Wells, who was, I believe, he was at Maryland, and he kind of played a similar role, but he had all these tools, looks really good, you're not good enough to do that in the NBA, right? So what is the thing you're going to do in the NBA? And I mean, I don't think his jumper doesn't look right for me, at least, as I don't see it as his projectable really. Is he going to just make 40% of his catch and shoot threes? I have a hard time seeing that. So you get the defense. I think the key is going to be figuring out how to be an NBA offensive player. And I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. Yeah.
I mean, his best shot, and you watch more NBA than I do, his best shot is that 2 dribble to the elbow jumper. Is that a thing in the NBA?
I don't watch enough. I don't watch any NBA really, but yeah.
So I watch none and you watch barely any. Perfect. This is a great draft analysis here.
But no, I do think like, and those little like pull up floaters, like I think that you want guys who are able to make those shots, but you want your best players to be able to make those shots. And Aaron Henry's probably not going to be the top usage offensive player on a team. So you're not really going to want him taking those shots. So yeah, I think that's what you have to figure out. I think there's enough there though. Like he can pass, he can do a lot. And compared to some of the other players who are maybe projected higher, like I don't think there's that much of a gap if you just want like a really good versatile defensive wing. Like it's almost one of those things where you become a commodity because you've been around. Like people aren't as excited about you as some of these new guys, but I don't know. I think Aaron Henry's definitely worth a gamble just based on his tools. I mean, what would Aaron Henry have looked like if he had better players around him last year? Like, it's just hard to say. So I like the upside here.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. It's going to always be, how you sell it. If an NBA team wants to say, man, the limits of Michigan State kind of forced him into that lead guard role and showed us more versus, hey, what would he have looked like as a point guard? Well, if he had a point guard, you wouldn't have seen any of that. Right. So who knows? But at the end of the day, ideally, given his defensive skills, you would like, from what I can tell on draft analysis, anyone between 6'3" and 6'9" who can kind of shoot threes and kind of play defense just automatically gets labeled 3 and D, right? Well, Aaron Henry gives you great defense. You know that he can guard multiple positions and he can get in guys and be a top-notch on-the-ball defender. But at the end of the day, not only did he never really proved himself as a three-point shooter, he regressed as a three-point shooter from his sophomore year to his junior year. So, if Aaron Henry goes out, he shot 34% as a sophomore. If he came out this year and shot 39% on threes, this is a totally different conversation, but he didn't. He shot 29% on threes. He only made 24 threes last year. I just don't know, like, in an NBA front office, is that just an automatic, like, what's Henry, 6'6"? Like, I'm sure there's a shit ton of really good defensive guys who match up with what he can do defensively, who can make shots better and give you more, because the ball handling is okay, but it's not great. And the shooting is kind of a hindrance. You don't have to guard him in the NBA.
Yeah. And for me, it's the lack of volume from 3-point range is almost as telling as the percentage. Like, I don't care if you shoot 29 or 33%, like whatever, that's a pretty small difference, but he's only taken 22% of his shots from three, which means he's not shooting threes, right? Like, he's a reluctant 3-point shooter. And that's what the risk is going to be, is that he doesn't even have confidence to take those shots in college. How is he going to take those shots in the NBA with a deeper line and everything else? So yeah, I agree. And it's just, other guys, it's easy to see the role, or at least a potential role. And I just not sure how you get there with Henry. I just think he has more tools physically than a lot of other guys maybe in this range, right? So if he can figure some of that out in the right situation, well, he is, I think, an NBA level defender and athlete. He has that potential.
Right. This has nothing to do with his prospects, but I will, on his way out the door, I'll say he was one of the most enjoyable people I ever got to cover. He was like top notch to deal with after games. His family's awesome. Just good people. But
in this range, that can matter. I mean, yeah, like,
I'm sure he interviewed great for sure.
That is like a differentiator. If you have two similar players you're thinking about investing in for a year, you're going to take the guy who's maybe not a knucklehead and will fit into what you want and actually work at it, because there's a way better chance they make those gains than a guy who maybe doesn't care or transferred 3 times or has been whatever. I mean, there's red flags with other people, and I think there's definitely not. And if you're going to be a late pick, that helps.
Yeah, he wrote it out with Izzo, right? A lot of players in that situation might not have, but he did, and chose to come back twice and takes great care of his body. There was no injury issues in 3 years, so he stayed healthy. He was pulled from the starting lineup once or twice this year for being late to stuff. I don't know how much. I don't think that dings you in this, but the good far outweighs the bad, I think, when it comes to who Aaron Henry is. So next on the list is going to be Chaundee Brown. Where's he on the big board here? You have it?
91.
91. There are people who think that he's a possible late second round pick. I don't know if I see that. But it's kind of the difference of Aaron Henry a little bit, where he is a proven 3-point shooter and he is a proven defender. So he gets tagged with the 3-and-D label. He's a 6'5", kind of glue guy type, right? Can give you lots of good things. I don't know if his talent is at an NBA level. And his athleticism is pretty limited in terms of verticality. So I don't know. I think he's going to get a shot somewhere. He's going to be one of those guys that if he goes and shoots the shit out of the ball in summer league, maybe it turns into a solid 2-way deal, right? Am I being too ambitious in this projection? I don't know.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't see Chaundee Brown as an NBA player. He doesn't have any guard skills for his size. He's not big enough to be a kind of combo forward. he was a great 3-and-D player in college. To be a great 3-and-D player in the NBA, I think generally speaking, you need to be able to do more than that in college and then step back into that role.
Right.
I think people look at his 3-point shooting, and he made a lot of threes this year. It was his best year. But are you really going to compare him as a shooter to Isaiah Livers as far as if you were going to bet on one of them shooting 40% from 3 in the NBA? I think Isaiah Livers is way more proven as a shooter. And I just have way more trust in him as a shooter. Chaundee Brown is basically a 6'5" guard who doesn't really handle the ball at all. And I just don't really see how that manifests itself at the next level. I think he was a perfect fit for what Michigan needed, but I don't really see him being able to play that role in the NBA. I think you'll see him in Vegas and he'll get some ops, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, 95% of his threes were assisted, 65% of his twos, which is a crazy high number for a guard. I mean, I think like Hunter Dickinson had like 70% of his twos assisted as a back to the basket center. So, I do like the fact that Dickinson was the only, Michigan player who produced a higher on-court, off-court point per possession differential than Chaundee. I think it does speak to the fact that like good things happen when he's on the floor. He works his ass off. He will get you loose balls. Like that's his ticket. All right. I think it's just like one of those guys who just gets out there and kind of annoys everyone, makes some shots, gets up in people's shit that like you're going to make, you can maybe get a 12th spot on a team or something like that's I think where he kind of falls into in terms of him trying to get there. He's also someone who could go over to Europe and probably make a shit ton of money and have a very, very enjoyable next 10 years. But, knowing him, he's sure as hell going to take as big of a run as possible at the league.
Yeah, I do. It's really he made such a great decision to go to Michigan. It was so much closer to the role that he really should have been playing in college. And he really did transform what he did on the court at Michigan compared to Wake Forest. At Wake Forest, he was taking all these weird pull-up 18-foot jumpers and not taking any threes and just sort of just floating all over the court. And just the clarity around his role at Michigan made him look like such a much more appealing player, I think, to the next level because it was actually a role that people play. And whatever he was doing at Wake Forest was not that. And he looked much better, even in limited minutes. Like he played less, but looked like a more draftable prospect. I don't think he would have been invited to the G League elite camp last year, right? It was really that role that helped showcase him. And I think that's important and a big part of his development. You also could say, well, he hasn't played it that long. Maybe he could keep getting better and better in that role. So that's the upside. I think he's a little overrated as a defender as far as what he did at Michigan and how that would project. I think laterally, I don't know if he's all the way at the level it might seem when you watch him play sometimes. And I wonder if that gets a little
not a lot of length either. He's like 6'6" with a 6'8" wingspan.
Yeah, so that's the question. I think he'll get invited to Summer League, and honestly, that's impressive for where he was a year ago. So that's probably where we're at with Chaundee.
Yeah, I mean, he can hit from the mid range. He does have.
He's a good shooter. I just don't know if he's going to be a great shooter.
Right. So you think of him as a big guard in the body of an undersized forward.
He's a small ball 4 that's shaped like a 2 guard.
Right.
What does that mean in the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, he's another dude though who will interview extremely well. To your point about Michigan, I think his decision to go to Michigan showed an immense amount of maturity because, he went into a program that already had Isaiah Livers and Franz Wagner. Like he knew what he was getting into and he wanted to go to a place where he could play under Juwan Howard and win games. Not a lot of guys do that, especially when it's your last shot. You're going to go transfer to Nebraska and think you're going to get, 17 shots a game because you might. So, I think that's a big check in the positive box for him.
It's also a good example of just playing more minutes and getting more shots isn't always the best way to make yourself look better when you're in the transfer portal, which is telling. So just all around, I think I could see him putting up numbers in the G League in the right spot. Like, he just seems like the kind of guy who would grind out a good G League season, though. Doesn't he? Just, I don't know. I can see that.
Yeah.
Do you want to hit on?
I also think Chaundee could be a hell of a coach one day, for what it's worth.
Interesting.
Let's hit on some Big Ten guys before we get out of here, just for the to stay on brand.
All right,
so got to start with Io, right?
Yeah. I think people are kind of sleeping on him here. Interesting. I think it sounds like he's kind of a fringe first rounder, and I think he should definitely be a first round pick. He was really good and has great measurements, tools. Like, well, I don't know why he's not viewed more as a late lottery guy. Personally, you don't seem to see it. I don't know. You're not a guy. You're not a fan.
I mean, I love his game. I love his college game. I just don't know how. I don't particularly trust him as a shooter. Sometimes it feels like you're hoping that it goes in instead of thinking that it goes in. He's got like decent playmaking, but I feel like he's a
playmaker.
He was a good playmaker in the Big Ten. He was. I don't know if he's going to be a good playmaker in the NBA.
Okay. I like him more than conventional wisdom.
What's his? I think he came in. He's like 6'5". Was that
6'10" wingspan?
Yeah, I like him. Don't love him for the league. I feel like if the Sixers took him or something like that, I'd be like,
We're gonna evaluate every Big Ten player based on if the Sixers took him and see how you react.
As we should.
So the Sixers draft Joe Wieskamp. What's your reaction?
Oh, big shrug.
Big shrug.
He was my boy forever. So I might be looking at him through the lens of a guy who like picked him first team All Big Ten as going into his sophomore year and was disappointed. But
he's the Duncan Robinson comp in this draft, in my opinion. He's the guy who you say, can he just be that? He's that good of a shooter, in my opinion. I think he can shoot off movement. He tested really well athletically, which is, I think, going to get him drafted in the first round just because of that. But man, he's a bad defensive player, and he might be able to jump high, but he is not a good lateral defender. So I think that's the worry with him. But I trust him as a shooter as about just about anyone in college. So I like that part of his game.
Yeah,
he was knocked down.
Yeah, last year he was. The year before that, he was anything but. I mean, his sophomore year was not good. But last year, what did he shoot here? Let me see. Yeah, 46.
He's a 41% career shooter.
Yeah, I agree.
He's the best. I would say he's probably the best shooter in the draft.
Okay,
right? He's got to be.
Probably has the
someone like
year.
Cam Thomas is a more versatile shooter who can make a bunch of pull-ups. Like, that's a different kind of shooter. But if you're talking about just a shooter, you have to like Wieskamp in that regard, I think. But can he actually hang on an NBA court? I don't know. Like, he doesn't. People are going to try to compare him to Kevin Huerter or someone like that. But Huerter was a way, way, way better defensive player when he was at Maryland. And Wieskamp, I just don't see him ever really being able to be a good defensive player. But we'll see.
He's going to get drafted.
Yeah, he could be
he's probably a borderline first round pick.
Yeah, I think he could be him and Dosunmu are kind of those late first rounders right now, it looks like, from the Big Ten.
Who else we got? Who else do you want to talk about?
Dwayne Washington, who's staying in. I think kind of a polarizing guy. I've seen him picked kind of all over the place. Tough shot maker. Obviously, Michigan fans listening to this will know what he can do when he's making shots. He kind of lit Michigan up over and over and over again.
He also shot Ohio State out of games.
Yeah, he's going to shoot, and you're going to win when he makes shots and lose when he doesn't. To be fair, that was all they had. Like, they had no other guard who could do anything with the ball.
Right.
But is he a NBA point guard? No, he's a scoring guard who should be a point guard, right? Like, I was never in love with his passing or playmaking or anything like that. So I don't see him as really a great defensive player. Him leaving Ohio State is like, he'll have a bigger impact on the Big Ten next year than the NBA, right? Like that. Ohio State needed him, and I don't think the NBA really needs him. That's kind of how I would put Dwayne Washington.
That's pretty fair. So career 36% 3-point shooter. He shot 37%.
Well, he takes tough shots.
Yeah, took a lot of tough shots. Sometimes ill-advised. And the thing with the thing that's good, it boils down with Dwayne Washington is some of the late game stuff where you're just like, man, now, but he's also unlikely to be in that role in the NBA, right? Of being in a spot where the ball's being put in his hands to go win a game. So I don't know. I don't see an NBA spot for Dwayne Washington. Maybe I'm completely underselling it. And maybe the lowlights outweighed what was an otherwise really good career. But yeah, he averaged under 2 assists a game last year playing 32 minutes. I think you'd like to see a little more creation for your teammates if you're going to be a 6'3" guard going to the league.
Yeah, that's.
And it's not like he was on some some dog shit team either. Like he had guys around him.
Yeah, for sure. And it was more about Dwayne Washington than the other 4 guys on the court.
Right.
Luka Garza, speaking of all about him, at 57 on Vicini's big board. Here's what I'd say. Does he stick in the NBA? Yes or no? He'll get drafted somewhere in the second round because it's Luka Garza and everything else. Is he an actual NBA player?
No.
I don't think so.
No.
I can't see it.
I don't know who in the world he is defending in the league. If you look at NBA centers, they're just I just don't see it. I don't see him. I love the way he runs up and down the court, right? I love the fact that he shot 44% on threes last year. Like he is big, but he's not a load. You know what I mean? Like It's not like he was that guy who was in an up and down game is caught running between 3-point lines, right? Like he gets his ass down the court. He has unbelievable hands and he works, but I just see him getting lost in a modern NBA that pulls you away from the basket, that has these ultra long athletic centers. Maybe somewhere you can stash him right as a 10th guy. And if the time calls for it and the lineup's right, you can throw him in there. But that's like best case scenario to me.
Yeah, I think the thing that's underrated about Luka Garza is that he's actually a really good shooter. Like it's not just he came back to school and made some shots. He was like a legit mid-range 3-point shooter, really good. And I actually trust that ability, but I don't even think it's hard to just put into words how bad he is defensively. Yeah. And it was so extreme that I don't know if it ever really works out for him as an actual NBA player. Because there are other guys who can make shots in the NBA and play some defense. And that's just not the case with Garza. And that's he's the guy that like goes to the G League and averages like 45 a game and then gets called up and then they just like, well, okay, this isn't going to work. So
I on his 3-point shooting, I even wonder if he gets the shot off in like, does he even get those looks? Because in college game, people were so scared that, anything to keep him from touching the ball around the basket, you take. Right. So
there are also the guys who play like that in the NBA are just bigger, right? Like I remember the Michigan Iowa game where Dickinson made Garza look small. Yeah. And the guys who play like Garza in the NBA are monsters, like Boban or whatever, right? Like huge. And Garza's not that sort of size. And I think that holds him back. So yeah, I don't know. Comps? I don't know the NBA comp. I think they're out of the NBA comps, generally speaking. So
let's see what he did against Kofi this year. Hold on 1 second. Game logs. Give it to me. Sports Reference. Come on. The ads on Sports Reference, and I'm my paying subscriber, but now they have pop-ups. Brutal. All right, let's see. I mean, he did pretty good against Kofi at least once. 19 points on 9 of 18, and then 8 of 21.
Yeah, but how'd Kofi do? That's
21 points, exactly.
That's the thing. That's always going to be the thing with guards.
They took an L to Illinois in the conference tournament. What did Kofi do? Kofi, oh baby, 11 for 17, 26 points, 8 boards.
Yeah, so that's the problem. I think there's one more Big Ten guy who might get drafted, and that would be Aaron Wiggins from Maryland.
I like Aaron Wiggins.
Aaron Wiggins had a great G League Elite camp, got called up to the combine. You like Aaron Wiggins as a pro? The Sixers drafted Aaron Wiggins in the second round. You're happy?
I like him as a guy that nobody looks at that actually has a chance to get a roster spot in the league event, like in time. It might be like a two-way next year, but in terms of his size and skill set and like that Alabama game, man, he was unreal. And he showed all kinds of different shit. He was hitting threes. He was making little shots off of pivots. He was making floaters. He was doing all this stuff where it suddenly looked like a guy who spent his first 2 years in kind of obviously behind Anthony Cowan, behind let's see, who else would have been there? The big boy Bruno, and behind Jalen Smith, right? Like he was a sixth man on some good teams. And then this year, the team was super undersized. It took a while for them to kind of find their way. And then they did at the end of the year. His last 10 games, he was awesome. Last 10 games, he scored 18 points, 6.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.5 steals. He made 2.5 threes a game. He's a really good defender. Like you want to talk about like a potential 3-and-D guy, there is some of that there, but I think of him as like he could be a NBA 2-man.
Yeah, the thing with Wiggins is he's always been capable of, if you watch his 6 or 7 best moments over a couple of weeks, he looks like a pro. I mean, he's 6'6", play out of ball screens, hit deep threes, do all this different stuff. He also just is completely irrelevant half the other games that he plays. And he's never really kind of had that mentality of, it's like, how do you weigh the potential of someone whose best moments look like an NBA player versus someone who's just a consistently better college basketball player for the same amount of time, right? Like Aaron Wiggins probably fits the mold of what you want for a 6'6" guy a little better than Aaron Henry, but Aaron Henry was a way better Big Ten player for 3 years. Isaiah Livers was just a way better shooter than Aaron Wiggins. Obviously, they're different roles more so, but like it's just so hard to get there with these guys who are very average Big Ten players. But I get why they're intriguing, but do you really trust them to break through at the NBA level? Aaron Wiggins was a pretty passive player for most of his career, and that's what I have a hard time rationalizing or figuring out.
That's the knock on him. I would push back a little bit on saying that Aaron Henry had a way better college career than Aaron Wiggins. I would push back slightly. I mean, it's not like Wiggins was a no-show. He was the conference 6th man of the year, and the last 10 games that he had were very similar to the last 10 games that Henry had.
Let's just say this. If you were drafting a team to go win a game right now from Big Ten players last year, I would pick Aaron Henry way before Aaron Wiggins.
Down the stretch?
Like just in general.
Down the stretch, it's close, man.
You're falling for the highlight package right here. Wait,
I don't think so.
Go watch. Like if you watched every game Aaron Wiggins played, you would not be wanting him to be the best player on your team. I can't imagine it. It's just not the case for me. I just can't get there with Wiggins, despite the tools. I'm shocked that you're this high on Aaron Wiggins.
I did talk to Dre Haynes yesterday, and he sold me pretty hard on it. But in fairness, when you go and like I pulled up the fucking Alabama game on YouTube, and I was like, holy shit. So
who looks bad when they make 5 out of 8 threes?
Well, it was more than that. It was the ball handling. It was the creativity to his offensive game. It was a guy. It looked like a guy who, and look, like NBA teams all said, like where has this been? Why wasn't this a thing? And that's the knock on him for sure. But in terms of projections and like how good he can be, like I just think there's a lot more kind of in the toolkit for a guy like Wiggins than for Henry.
Yeah, but did you watch any of Wiggins' possessions against Michigan last year?
I watched the one where he put Franz on a poster.
All right, well, that was like one of the 6 shots he made in 3 games against Michigan. So I thought
he was pretty good in the conference tournament game.
He had 11 points. Then he was 1 of 8 from 3 against Michigan, though. The first Michigan game, he had 5 points, 2 of 11. Like he had a lot. There's a lot of like 2 of 11.
Sure.
1 of 6 games on the Aaron Wiggins game.
He definitely had an issue becoming the guy. I think he eventually got there, or at least close to a version of. But I can't believe we're talking this much about Aaron.
I'm shocked.
I love it, but
at least I can understand why you're high, because you just got the hard sell, and now I'll buy into it a little more, because I was like, where are you coming from this? But next you're gonna tell me like, I don't know, Darryl Morcell is gonna be the defensive player of the year in the Big East. Like I'm not buying that either. So all right, Aaron Wiggins to the Sixers, lock it in. See, we'll talk in a year.
When's their 2nd round pick? Where is it? Give it to me. No one else
I don't see anyone else on this
greatest
list.
Conference in college basketball.
Delano Banton, 6'9" point guard who can't shoot. You in or out?
I'm gonna pass there. Gonna pass. You're buying?
I'm a little worried that I was hyping up Nebraska and then he just went left, but I'm intrigued by his passing at his size, but it's terrifying how he just won't shoot. I don't want that in my life.
You've already bought Nebraska again for next year.
Yeah, I'm in on Nebraska this year.
I think this is the 3rd straight year.
Banton leaving is making me a little nervous, but they got Alonzo Verge coming in. I'm doubling down on Nebraska. They're going to be
doubling down. Holy shit!
They're going to be they're going to take a step forward. They're not going to be the worst team in the league.
Okay. All right. Well, we will get to all of this. I feel like October will probably be our big preview month, when we will drop a Michigan mega preview. We'll drop a Michigan State mega preview, and then a Big Ten preview. Which
into those mega previews, that's big time. When we get to the mega preview pods, people really get excited.
Those are the ones I want to record in the PM, so I can have like 2 or 3 IPAs in me and really kind of let loose on these things, and just let the takes fly. Exactly. So that is what the people want. That is the foundation upon which this podcast has been built. So we do appreciate everyone for listening. You got anything on the way out?
No, this was good.
This was good. All right. Appreciate it. Subscribe to Hoops. Dylan is still grinding through the summer and producing content. All of his recruiting stuff has been absolutely top notch. Saw recently he just did a few takeaways from the July recruiting period, which was really good. So get caught up on all of that. And then be sure to subscribe to The Athletic, both for my college basketball coverage and my golf coverage, which I know you all want. So not only that, but all of the 100 plus, 200 plus sports writers that we have on their site. So thanks for listening. Leave a review in the iTunes store. Tip your bartenders and your servers.